Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome. I am Julie Volker-Morris, Director of UO Common Reading, and it's a pleasure to have you with us today for this conversation. Technical details, most of you know, but just if you have questions, please drop them into the chat, into the Q&A. And we have support staff here to help share information as appropriate in the chat, and we'll be fielding your questions. The University of Oregon's Common Reading program is in its 7th year as a campus-wide program dedicated to building discussion and opportunities for connection across and within communities of students, faculty, and staff. As the program has grown, we have maintained our commitment to sharing stories and sharing experiences that matter. Stories that help our campus center student success goals around social responsibility and positive experience. During this academic year, our focused theme is Listen, Learn, Act. Doneka Scott, Vice Provost for Undergraduate Education and Student Success, is facilitating our conversation today. And she initially made the call for the entire division of Undergraduate Education and Student Success, as well as all campus leaders, to follow this way of thinking about listening, learning, and acting following the murder of George Floyd last spring. Common Reading picked up on this challenge, as have others throughout our campus. The theme is dedicated to listening to, learning about, and honoring Blackness and Black experience. Our intent is to uplift stories that address historical context for racism and bias policies in order to construct more inclusive and viable futures. We acknowledge that the UO is a historically and contemporarily majority white institution located on Kalapuya Ilihi, the homeland of the Kalapuya people. Treaties of the 1850s dispossessed Kalapuya people of their indigenous homeland by the United States government. They were forcibly removed. Descendants are citizens of the Confederated Tribes of Grand Ronde Community of Oregon and the Confederated Tribes of the Siletz Indians of Oregon. Today, these individuals and communities continue to make important contributions on this land, at the UO, in their nations, and across the region we refer to as Oregon. We also acknowledge that the political state boundary known as Oregon is and has been a majority white state, whose original constitution was approved by the federal government as a white utopia, barring and removing Black individuals, pioneers, and families who had arrived seeking freedom, self-efficacy, and belonging. These are stories we need to read about, to be told aloud, to be discussed, problems that need to be redressed. Common Reading has sought to raise greater awareness through this year's theme by, in the fall, listening to the 1619 podcast, a portion of the New York Times Magazine 1619 Project. It's an audio, visual, and written piece developed by Pulitzer Prize-winning journalist Nikole Hannah-Jones, who will actually be speaking to our campus community on Friday, February 19th. So we hope you will participate in that conversation as well, and we'll share that event information in the chat. This term, we are learning through story, research, and personal experience shared by one of our own leading lights at the University of Oregon, Kimberly Johnson. Johnson grew up in Eugene and completed her BA at the UO. She noted that Ethnic Studies 101 is the course that launched her on her path today. Throughout the year, we're encouraging everyone to take anti-racist action, specifically actions that tackle anti-Black racism. We're highlighting events and activities for learning, engagement, and activism. This has been a week of amazing engagement. Kimberly Johnson has spoken with students in lively classes here at the university. She has been awarded the Pacific Northwest Booksellers Best of for 2021 and spoken to a sold-out virtual audience on Tuesday night. Significant thanks to Kimberly for saying yes to joining the UO community in new ways and new conversations through UO Common Reading and the Division of Equity and Inclusion. As author and activist, alongside her perhaps more well-known campus identification as Associate Vice Provost for Academic Advising. So I'm going to turn it over now to Vice Provost Scott and Kimberly Johnson, two very close friends and colleagues, for today's conversation. Thank you both for being here.
And thank you for the opportunity, Julie. This is such an honor and such a privilege to be able to talk to you today, Kimberly, about your book, that I completely and utterly love, have bought so many copies, and anytime there's a gift to be given, they get this book. So we are fortunate to have our very own Kimberly Johnson to talk about her book today. And so 2 days ago, you had more of a formal discussion around your book in an amazing session. And today, when talking to you and how you wanted to progress with this session, you wanted it to be a little informal. And so I, in my mind, was thinking about comedians in cars getting coffee type of a situation. But we're neither comedians, well, we're not paid comedians. We're on Zoom and I don't like coffee. So I think what we arrived at is that we would have somewhat of a book club session where we just get a chance to listen to you and talk about how, how we've arrived to this day to day. So I know we have lots of people on this webinar today, and some of them may not have had an opportunity to read your book yet. And so can you just share a little bit about the novel so that we can orient those?
Yeah, great. Well, thank you. It's really great to be here. And I hope we can do lots of kikiing too, as my homegirls say. Yeah, really excited. And hopefully there'll be lots of time for questions for people to ask about the book. But so my book, This Is My America, it's a young adult, what I call a social thriller, social justice thriller. It's sort of like this name that I created for myself. But it's about a 17-year-old Black girl named Tracy Beaumont, who's living in Galveston, Texas. And for 7 years, she's been writing these letters to Innocence X, which is basically like, giving homage to the Equal Justice Initiative and the Innocence Project that work on wrongful incarceration cases. And she's been trying to free her father. He's in his last year of his sentence when her brother Jamal gets accused of killing a local white girl in their community and goes on the run. And so it is part social justice, anti-racist work, talking about lots of generational themes, but it's also a mystery, a double mystery. Have all these elements of being a page turner, and it has lots of love and joy and all that kind of stuff. So that's my story.
Nice. And you mentioned page turner. That's exactly what it was. And actually, one of our colleagues shared with me very early on that she started reading the book, unfortunately, at 9 p.m. or 10 p.m. at night, and basically stayed up all night continuing to read the book because it is a book that you really cannot put down. I read it in one sitting as well. And, so many people have really approached the book in that way. It was really, I laughed, I cried, I yelled at Tracy as a mom. There were times where I just wanted to shake her. It was kind of interesting, the different kind of personas that she had throughout where, maybe people could identify with different aspects of her throughout the book. Her friendships were important as well. And so you are really amazing at kind of layering all of these concepts and weaving things together. So can you talk a little bit about kind of your process and how you do that?
Yeah, I think because I'm around young people all the time and have for a long time, and I'm an avid young adult reader. So in talking to you, I'm in my little corner, AKA it's my closet that I sort of create as my tiny space so that no one intrudes my sort of muse in talking about these stories. But I love young adult stories. I love the coming of age moment. It reminds me of our students, how often they're going through something and they're sort of identifying who they are and how they want to be and operate in this world, but often still filled with a lot of hope. And so that's a heavy sort of element of my stories that I write, is that I really want there to be a space for young people to see themselves, and then for people who are not of that sort of the age range of this particular book to have those memories of what it was like and see themselves in different ways. I think that even when I read a story and it's a 16-year-old girl or a 16-year-old boy or something like that, I still see myself in them in some way, or a memory of someone I know or knew growing up. And you know, part of like young adult work, and the reason why I love it right now in a genre is that they're really pushing diverse voices to be able to tell the stories that for far too long haven't been represented in literature, and in particular, stories by Black writers. You know, the industry actually has more stories written by minoritized communities writing about those particular populations than they do by those characters. And so for me, it's really important in building Tracy as a character is that she feels real. And some of the critiques within the traditional publishing setting is that they want to look at characters being a certain kind of way. And if you have these sort of multi-layers, think it's not realistic. And I wanted to push completely against that, because the students that I work with, the students that so many of us work with, you know, one day they're having an amazing day and they've done well in their paper and they've done all this stuff, and the next thing something happens, whether that's a breakup or a broken friendship, something happened in the classroom, something happened with their family, and it can be anywhere from something completely small to something huge and tremendous in their life, but they're still the same person. And so for me, that's how I wanted to really build the character. And the last thing that I'll just say is that I also want I wanted people to be on a journey with her so that they can start to maybe understand why students approach things in a different way, or why young people maybe approach things in a different way. And in particular, students who are leaders or students who are activists, who are just learning how to use their voice. And sometimes their approaches like confuse people about, like, they either are irritated or frustrated, or they, you know, they want to sort of like maybe scold them or, you know, reteach them how they need to do things. And I wanted, you know, all the readers to sort of be in Tracy's head to figure out that, you know, while she might make some choices that maybe are unsafe, she makes some unsafe choices. I'll just put it out there. She makes unsafe choices. She does. But it's
Yes,
a book.
she does.
It's a book. That's the thrill element. That's what keeps it exciting. That's what keeps you sort of turning. But a lot of it is very serious things, just in terms of her friendships, her happy moments, her sad moments, you know, her brave moments, her moments of using a voice. I think all of that, to me, is how you build, you know, realistic characters that people tend to care more about and want to read more of.
Yeah. And so in that same vein of your kind of multi-layered characters, you also have multiple themes. Um, there are many themes throughout the book. And in fact, you know, one review that I read, and it actually made me chuckle, it said, incendiary, powerful, and still far too relevant. This is My America peels back systemic racism in the American legal justice system, and has a compelling mystery to boot. So there are, you know, there's relationship, there's a love triangle. We talk about the legal system, there's the cultural aspects. And you know, one thing that you said in there that I wanted to be able to talk about today is the prison industry complex is a $182 billion industry that feeds off the lives of Black, brown, and poorer people caught up in its vicious cycle. And while mass incarceration is a complex problem, I wanted to simply focus on how it's almost impossible to prove someone is innocent without adequate representation, which I think is really key. And I wanted to hear a little bit more about that and your thoughts and your inspirations in telling this story, not only dealing with the death penalty in wrongful incarceration case with Tracy's father, James, but also her brother, Jamal, being suspected of killing a girl in their community.
Yeah, you know, I think at the time when I was writing, I was in a space of pain, you know, really honesty about what was happening. It was, you know, right around 2015. You know, it just seemed like every day I turned on the television, I was traumatized, seeing people who look like me or look like someone in my family and my life be brutalized, and media sort of portraying them as this sort of this thing, right? Not this human, not this brother or sister or mother or father or cousin. community member, that it was then a story to be told. And you had these sort of brave family members, often brave women, the mothers, having to come to a microphone with cameras on them, holding themselves together, talking about why their child needed to have justice, that they had to be the strong one. And then all these arguments that were happening in media. And oftentimes when we talk, especially during the time period we were talking about Black Lives Matter, having to actually justify and explain it, and then having to sort of demonstrate another death. Okay, now do you believe us? Another death. Now do you believe us? And it was so frustrating. And I also felt really compelled to, I think it was the educator and the lover of Black history, politics, and law, all the nonfiction elements that I read. I've always been a student on these particular issues, just trying to have understanding. And but I felt like the conversation was really only about police brutality. And while that, I felt it's a very important conversation, I felt like we were going into this cycle defending, if you critique it, then you're saying we don't need police. And if you don't, then like, what about their lives? And for me, that wasn't actually what the focus was about. The focus really was about people are being harmed. And yes, this time it was by police, but then there was George Zimmerman. There's other people who actually, Ahmaud Arbery, the most recent case, they weren't police affiliated. They just were people policing Black people. And I want to just really expand that conversation about the entire system that's entrenched in racism from the point of slavery. I mean, from that very element, when you've seen slave patrols all the way up through now, is that it's been expected in this country that's how it's okay to treat a particular community that way for all the different layers. And the last of why I really wanted to tell a story that was more generational and sort of like pinpointing the different sort of elements about how mass incarceration impacts Black and brown communities is that often when people are protesting for Black Lives Matter or just demonstrating that something is wrong with the system, they'll use these sort of like dog whistles about like, well, you don't care about Black on Black crime, or you don't care about these what's happening in Chicago, and they sort of throw this terminology without actually addressing how it got to that point and how those communities are actually treated. And so, I wanted to take all of sort of my lessons, my studies, my understanding, and not tell another story that was just focused on police brutality, but actually have all those elements. And I do that between the fathers in this story that have there's 3 different Black men in this story, and they all have different experiences that occurred with the system, and then the young Black man about the kind of thing that he particularly experienced. And then there's an element in the story where Tracy has an interaction with the police and the system, and so that's really how I wanted to weave that. My inspiration with the death penalty came directly from Brian Stevenson in his work with Just Mercy. I, had read it during that same time period and was completely moved by how much he's just basically given his life to this work. And he has such a compelling way of talking about the people that he's worked with, and how often he has been the only person on their corner. And he says things like, you are not the worst thing that you have ever done. Or if you don't have the capital, then you actually, aren't able to defend yourself, but those with the capital do. And I felt like if I told a story that talked about the death penalty, every reader could put themselves in the experience of what would happen if someone that I knew was actually sentenced to death and they didn't do it, and it was a wrongful incarceration. Everyone should be outraged. And I felt like if I could get readers to sort of understand that particular environment, that someone could be in, and the system that's supposed to protect them gets it wrong, then what else in the system is actually broken down? And so that was sort of my opener, but I knew that I didn't want the story to just talk about innocent cases. And so I really tried to sort of bring in different ways in which, let's talk about rehabilitation. What does it look like when you did do something and you've done your time and you're out in the world? What does your life look like? Do you get to live again? Do you get to have these different kinds of experiences? And so that's why, and it was difficult to weave all of that, but I felt like it was really important because there was such an empty space on that particular cycle in literature.
And so timely with when your book did debut, right? It was in the middle of, our social and racial unrest and anti-racism. It came out at really a perfect time that people could grasp and read and learn. And I want to talk a little bit about kind of the launch. I want to pivot away a little bit from the actual context because I want to talk about you, and I want to talk about how Kimberly Johnson that we know and love has actually blown up as a result of this as well. And so before the pandemic, you were set to go on these all expensive paid national book tour in early August. And at that time, I was trying to figure out how I could go too.
You sure were. That's
Right.
not a lie.
And then COVID happened. And so what was it like to really debut this amazing book and have a pandemic that we haven't seen in 100 years kind of stop that process for you, so you weren't able to meet readers or you weren't able to travel, you didn't have an opening in a bookstore. Tell us a little bit about kind of that process and how you get here today.
Yeah, I mean, it was, before George Floyd's murder and Ahmaud Arbery and Breonna Taylor, we were dealing with a pandemic, and the pandemic sort of hit, and it was hard because I had time. Me and my editor had worked really hard to time the release of my book to be in summer, so I could actually take time away from work and go on a book tour and do the kinds of things that I never really could do during the school year. But then COVID hit and publishing shut down. I mean, it really, really shut down to the point where even my book, what they do is they give these ARCs, they're advanced reader copies of the books, and they're unedited versions, and it's how you sort of get the buzz. You get your book out and people start to read it. But with COVID, the timing, they didn't have my cover done and ready to be on the book. So even recognition of my book cover, I already felt like, wow, I'm not gonna really get, like, I've worked really hard for this. I didn't grow up thinking that I was a writer. I started seriously, and not seriously writing, but like literally writing for the first time in my life at 32. Um, Never really having written short stories. I wrote papers for school, but they were never creative writing or anything. They were research papers that I was writing. I've never sort of been on this journey of creative writing and felt, like I wasn't good at it. I could never do it. And so I'd finally gotten to the place where I'd learned the craft and tell the story, and then everything shuts down. And so, that was so hard for me, because I didn't know what to do, and my publicist didn't know what to do, and all of the publishers were sort of trying to figure it out. How does virtual work? And it really sort of mirrored, I think, our lives, all of our lives. And what does this mean now that the industry, everything, work, U of O, is closed, and we have to have meetings and have to do all this stuff. And so that was really hard to think about, especially as a Black writer. The industry is very, very small. The number of Black writers, this year is actually the high, 2020 was the highest year of the number of actual Black young adult writers of books that's ever came out in the field. And we all were actually, we were in the sort of like social side, sort of social media group together, just devastated that we finally had our opportunity. And when people started getting things together, we started realizing that we still could have events. And so then that started to feel better, that there could be something. But I think the thing that probably was the hardest for me was that my release was really timely, but it's quite painful. It's, it was really painful that all of that happened with George Floyd and the world sort of realizing like, oh my goodness, yeah, oh yeah, Black lives do matter, like, oh, I finally get it. And I say that laughing and joking and knowing that there are people who are like, I'm sorry, I didn't know. But it's painful. And
Yeah.
so I think it was hard for me at first, sort of like trying to think about how do I talk about my book and promote my book and have it not feel like I'm promoting it at the same time that something horrific happened, that I'm benefiting from that in any kind of way. And so that was really hard. And so I actually poured um, my in young adult world, we're very active on social media. It's sort of like a thing you have to do. So sorry, got to be on there. And I promoted a lot of other books by Black writers. I really like to sort of demonstrate them in my writing corner here to elevate that. But then I started to sort of kind of calm down about my strong feelings about releasing at a time that was there, and realizing that when I was writing in 2015, I felt very called to do it because I needed to talk about these issues. I really felt like there was an other sort of presence that was pushing me, reminding me of when I was younger and felt like I could change the world. And that's why I dedicated so much time to writing This Is My America. And so I finally stepped into my moment to be like, I actually do have something to say. And I work with so many people, and there's a lot of young adult writers who actually don't have the opportunity to work with young people, even if they're talking about social justice work, and don't necessarily understand some of these elements. And I could actually bridge that gap with a younger generation about activism, as you get older and those kinds of things. And so so that felt right to me. And it feels good, and it feels important, and I feel validated that my feeling about the world ahead of what the larger world, was seeing, was on point.
Hmm. That's wonderful. And which is great. So you started there, and it's kind of been um, this rollout that continues. And I remember saying to you early on, make sure you're documenting all
Mhm.
this, because you're only going to have your first debut book that is award winning and best selling. I mean, when your book came out, Kimberly, you were 1, 2, and 3. So the book, you were ranked 1, 2, and 3. And it was your book, it was the Kindle, and it was an audio. So it was This Is My America everywhere. You've racked up so much recognition um, from educators, from librarians. Your book is being read in a humanities program in Tennessee, um, where the entire school district had a competition about their America. You have an award, spot award in Texas. There's a New Jersey school district they bought books for all of their high school students. Project Lit programs, where they select top diverse reads for book club programs around the country. I attended last night the awards for the Pacific Northwest. And, did you so one, I guess I should ask, did you do what I told you, which is make sure you're documenting all of these great things that are happening so that you don't forget. But in doing that and reflecting upon it, um, did you see your book really reaching the far ends of the earth? Did you anticipate that? And then what are your thoughts on kind of what's happening?
No, I had no, I did not. I thought my book was going to be a small book in terms of in the industry, and that yeah, it would be sort of like a niche book that had a lot of themes that would be really, really hard for people to sort of connect and be interested in. But I was with a publisher who really supported me and wanted to do it. And so I never thought that it would, sort of, reach reach the span that it has at all. And the kind of panels and, sessions that I've been able to be with other writers that I absolutely admire and fangirl over, honestly. Like, I'm on a panel, I'll be like, oh my gosh, how did I get on this panel? Like, there's
Yeah,
like,
yeah.
imposter syndrome is real. Yeah, I never imagined that that would be my experience.
Yeah, I mean, it's pretty exciting to be an outsider looking in and seeing all these great things that are happening. And so you've had some exciting things happen. You have been on panels. You have accolades while you've been working on this. And what would you say would be the most amazing thing to date? Again, I'm having you go back to your journal that I know you're not journaling in, just to identify some of the, what's been most exciting to date?
Um, Probably the most exciting thing to date was being on a panel with Dr. Ibram Kendi. Like that was like the biggest thing. That was at Cleveland Public Libraries. And I was on the panel also along with Yusuf Salem from the Exonerated Five and Ibi Zaboa, who they wrote Punching the Air. That's right there. And I was on a panel earlier with them before, and Kimberly Jones wrote I'm Not Dying With You Tonight, who sort of like has, been wildly known, and Nick Stone, and for Barnes and Noble. So it was like a Barnes and Noble virtual panel with all of those groups too. And that to me has been probably the most amazing thing, to be in their space. And I think it was sort of the end of that panel, and Ibram Kendi was like, man, I wish I had dope covers like that when I was a kid. And I was like, he said my cover's dope.
Yay, yay.
I was
Right,
done.
right,
I
right.
was like, I think that's been really cool. And I think just like the probably the coolest thing, there's one I can't even say because I've been sworn to secrecy for a very long time, and one day I'd be able to say that's really, really cool one day. But the other is just being in Target, like the trailer, like like that's probably like, I never dreamed that. Like, I never imagined that would be a thing. So
Yeah,
that's been really cool.
that was one of the most amazing things for me, was having your book trailer play in Target all across the country. How cool is that? Um, so I'm glad it's been a whirlwind. It's been a long time. It's definitely been a long time coming. Because I remember first on when you're like, yeah, it'll be about 2 or 3 years. And I'm like, no, it can't be that long. And it has been in that time. Um, and so, you know, we have students who are on here, and we have folks who are really getting started and are getting started writing. And, a couple of questions around that is, how do you do it? How do you balance working a full-time job plus kind of the writing, and you have a family? Um, how have you made that work? And so what was your kind of writing process to even get to this point?
Yeah, sorry, I just got distracted by the chat. But yes, pop your questions in the chat. I think we'll
Chat or
transition
Q&A?
eventually to chat.
I'm
I'm sorry,
looking,
Q&A.
yeah, I'm looking
Q&A.
at
So drop
both.
your questions in Q&A. But I've always been a really busy person, and I think like being a first gen, and I know that you know that too, Doneka, having to work like as a student, like I had a job in high school and I played all the sports and I helped around the house, and I was involved in student organizations and leadership roles. And so I've always been a very busy person. It's sort of like what I was used to, even through college. 3 jobs, one making beds at a bed and breakfast, being the desk person and cleaning after people, and then my like leadership stuff that I was getting paid at U of O in terms of like working on the different student organizations that you can get the stipends from, and then being a student, and then being involved in a sorority and other activism stuff. So I've always been a very, very busy person, even through grad school, very busy. So I think it's always been in my nature. I'm also a doer. It's hard for me to sit idle, like I had to on Sunday, I had to force myself after an event to just get in the bed and rest because I felt like something was wrong. Like I wasn't feeling well, but it also was a reflection of like, oh, it's been over a year and I actually haven't really taken a vacation, because when I take a vacation, I actually write. So I don't actually
Mhm.
rest. Like today was a vacation day for me and I took like a 45-minute nap and I actually worked the whole day. Like I don't know how to stop, and that's not good. Actually, that's good. That's not good. Don't do that. It's
Don't
not
do
good
that.
self-care. But it's consistency for writing. It's actually consistency because I don't actually have a lot of time because I am involved in my non-work hours. I have one organization that I work with that requires me to be in 6 different meetings every month on I have one that's a Thursday at 8 o'clock, another that's a 7 o'clock on a Wednesday, and the other two are on weekends. So I have to carve time to write and be with my family. And so I write every Saturday and Sunday for 3 hours. I don't write during the week. I can't write during the week because I'm in, I'm working and I am in meetings and I'm, doing other kinds of things. And then when I take a vacation, I will dedicate, it'll be like work for me. So it's like, I'm off this, I'll take a week off and I'm writing that whole week and treating it like a job. And that's how I do it. And I sort of like just I'm used to it and I do it and I push myself to do it. But it's also not something you can do forever. And so, I have to, like, some of the service organizations and some of my engagement, I have to choose about what not to be present at, because I'm also the kind of person, if I'm at something and I see a problem, then I want to help it or volunteer for something. And I physically cannot do that. Like even in my own job, I physically cannot help every single person do everything that they might need of me. That's just actually not even humanly possible for anyone to do.
Yeah.
And I think I've been working towards trying to figure out those layers of those boundaries of like where I need to stop it. I'm still kind of not good at it.
Hmm. That's wonderful. I alluded to it earlier, you touched on it a bit. So, when you finish your book, that's kind of only the beginning for those aspiring writers who would like to be published. What can you just give us a window into what that process was like?
Yeah, it's different for every writer, and I'll just speak to traditional publishing because there's all other kinds of market. But at the point I knew I wanted to be in what we call like the big five, and now it's maybe the big four. I'm not sure what it is before, but the major publishers. My goal is I wanted my book to be in a bookstore. Like I wanted to be able to take my kids because I loved going to bookstores and libraries. I wanted to be able to take my kids and them to see a cover of Black kids on the front. I'm saying Black kids because that's one of my favorite books here too, but just like a Black kid on the cover of a book, because I didn't get to see that when I was a kid, and that's where I wanted to go in that path. um, Publishing is a really long process usually. You pretty much have to get a literary agent. To get a literary agent does take time, a long time for a lot of people. And for me, it's about just being persistent through, in the industry we call rejections. So, to get a literary agent, you have to submit your materials. They'll ask whether or not to see more, and often they'll pass and they'll say like, yeah, no thanks, but we sort of call it like we got a rejection. And so I wrote my first book. It took me 2 years to write my first book. I received like 150 rejections from literary agents. Then I worked on my second book, and that was maybe about a year of working on that book, and then a year of submitting it to agents and revising and um, having an agent say that they wanted to sort of work with me if I did some revisions, and kind of going through that process. And then with This Is My America, that's actually the moment when I got a literary agent who had my second book and read partially of my third book. And so it's a process that there's lots of vetting throughout and a lot of hurdles. And once I got my agent, it took about a year for me to work with my agent just to get it polished, ready, and revise again. So it's more intensive. And so I think if there's any writer, oftentimes I meet a lot of writers because I go to, conferences or interact with a lot of writers, and they get frustrated by the revisions process or how much their agent might be requiring of them to revise. And it actually just makes you better. honestly, your story is that much better. I learned through all the rejection from my first two books that I had. Um, I'm a better writer than I am, and every time I write, I'm actually faster at writing because I'm understanding how to tell a story better. So the next book after this book that I've written and my editor has looked at, that's a historical fiction. It took me even less time to write. I have another book that I just sold. It took me probably the shortest amount of time that I've ever written a book to get my first draft done. And it's because now I know I've had all these eyes on it, these professional eyes on my work. Now I know how to sort of like prepare and write. There's a lot of resources online, and so for people who are interested, there's lots of like contests. There's just tons of information about how to get a literary agent, what to do, what not to do, how to revise, get feedback, the publishing industry. And I feel like I actually got like an additional degree in publishing from like Twitter, like honestly,
That's
because
great.
like I learned so much from it. And so I think that you don't have to, you don't have to be networked to be able to be a writer. You actually can learn it on your own because there's so many resources online.
Great. And I have one follow-up question to that. And I see there's a question in the chat, so I will get to that. But you talk about you have your next book and you in your next book and the book after that and the next book. When I read this book, I see that there could be a spin-off story on a multitude of characters. So we could have in even kind of relationships. So Tracy and Tasha, Tracy and Dean, Tracy and Quincy, Corinne and her younger sister, there's Jamal, there's James, there's Daddy Greg, there's Jackson Ridge. You name, because your characters are so robust and well written. Um, you know, have you thought about This Is My America too? And if you use that title, I think I deserve royalties.
That I can't use that title, I guess.
Show me the money. But have
Give
you
me my
thought of
pennies. Let me get my little pennies from each book.
exactly. So have you thought of, so is this a standalone book or do you think anything comes from it as well?
It's funny because it's always been a standalone to me. I've never thought about it being any more, but when I have gone, so virtually now I can go into schools, and I've gone to um, different high schools around the country, and even middle schools. I even met with like a fifth grade, sixth grade class, which is so awesome because when I wrote, I never thought fifth or sixth graders would be reading my book.
Yeah.
But I always read up. So I totally get it now that I'm meeting like these young people, but I have to sort of change my language a bit so they can kind of just talk at a different level. But they love the characters so much. And so then it had me starting to think about, could there be, what was actually this story like before they moved to Texas and their life, was in Louisiana. So I don't talk a lot about it in the book, but that element of their displacement from, New Orleans to Texas, getting on a bus, is, like that could be a whole other story, or even just Jamal um, as another story. I have always still had thoughts in my head because the book isn't done in my head. I'm
Yeah.
still like, if we were to have the actual spoiler session, or people talk to me about the very end, like I would actually have to pause to remember what I wrote in the book, because my head, I'm still playing with the whodunit element. Like, ooh, I should have did this. Like my head is still kind of thinking about what that happens. And Tracy with her relationship with Dean and Quincy, like that to me, I'm like, she's just a kid. Like, what's her whole life like 5 years from now, 10 years from now? So then that's when I started to kind of think about, could there be more to it, especially now that I get emails from students, from young students who have read it in their schools, who ask me like, what happened to her after? Like, it'll be like what happened to Tracy after? Like, and it just is like, that would be a lot to talk about right now. I can't write that in the email. I don't know. What do you think happened to her?
Right.
You know?
Right. When I think your first spin-off book should be about Dr. Scott. I'm just gonna put that plug in right
Yes,
now.
there,
Because I think that that
Dr.
would be
Scott does make a highlight in my book, everyone.
heck yeah. So that's the next book. I assume that's the one you just sold. So anyways, we have questions in Q&A. We have questions in chat that I want to bring in as well, because we can have our book club conversation the whole rest of the time, but I'm supposed to share you with other people. There is a question, since we're talking about this, about audiobook. Can you discuss the process of making the audiobook? Do you have input in who is chosen or how the characters are read?
Yeah, so when I got my book deal and my book was getting published a few months later, they told me that I was going to have an audiobook. So usually you actually don't know if you're going to have it or not, and not all books come out with an audiobook, or definitely not young adult books, but ones that they sort of position and think might have a good market in there. And they did ask me if I had any people that I was interested in, and I was interested in Bonnie Turbin, who was the person who did my audiobook, because she has this so very iconic voice, and she sort of is kind of she's known for doing well-known audiobooks because of her inflection of voice and the ways that she did it. And so but she did it in her home, so it was recorded during COVID, and so I almost didn't have an audiobook because it kind of depended on who actually has a studio in their home that they actually could record it. And so Doneka Scott wasn't available, so then we went with Bonnie
I am
Turbin.
still waiting. I am still waiting for the phone call. I am still waiting to be
Yeah,
called.
I think we inverted the numbers on your
Oh, I
cell
see.
phone.
I
That
see.
must have been what happened.
I
But
see how you are. I see how you
yeah,
roll.
yeah. But so yeah, so that's how the audio book process. And I didn't have any input. Like I didn't even kind of know what I would tell. But once I knew that she was a person, I knew that she would do a great job. If I was to ever have another audiobook again, I definitely would want to be it's not about you, girl. Be a voice, be a voice on saying, because I like writing authors notes in my work, because they're usually they're dealing with lots of current real issues, or if they're from the past, there's a lot of historical components that I like to talk about, and I would love to read my author's note or my acknowledgments, and I've seen other authors do that. And so if I was to do that, I definitely would be interested.
Great. There's another comment too about processes. So the cover art is striking and beautiful, which it is. Can you tell us more about what it means in the process of how this was created?
Yeah, so I was really fortunate that my publisher, Penguin Random House, wanted me involved all throughout, which also isn't a common thing. Usually publishing, they kind of feel like they know what they're doing. They ask you for your feedback about what are you hoping for. And so I created a Pinterest board. I feel like it's still, maybe I kept it so people can see it. I don't remember. And I picked just book covers that I really liked, but I actually picked a lot of Black art because I absolutely love Black art. I wanted it to have a message, so it was really important to me that, so I included a ton of pictures of Black girls with big hair, like in all the images, because I wanted them to be really clear that I really wanted the cover to be bold. If you look at books that were published before 2020. 2020 is a year of Black girls mostly, but they're also Black boys and Black trans people on covers of books really for the first time for young adult space in its trajectory, written by own voices authors. And so it's been an amazing year for that. But if you look before that, even 2015, 2016, or 2017 with The Hate U Give, that image is such a small image of the main character, if you're familiar with that cover. Or allegedly another book has a Black main character who's sort of like minuscule on the picture where you almost are like, what's going on with the photo? That's sort of been the history of that. And I was able to really strongly advocate that I wanted to have like artistic expression and the flag. So a lot of the Pinterest pictures that I chose, I really wanted to reclaim the flag, but have different elements of what that is. And for those that have only seen the front, and maybe they haven't got the book yet, but so like the front has these sort of like very interesting elements with a sort of handcuff earring, and her hair is braided looking like the flag. But if you look at the back, her hair is sort of like more out and free, like the continent of Africa. And there's sort of like this artistic messaging. And if you can tell from the picture behind me, I'm trying to see if I can do it. This is the artist that did my cover. His name is Chuck Stiles. This is James Baldwin, one of my literary activist heroines that I just absolutely love and have studied so much of his work. And so I was able to be a part of that process after they selected the artist for my book.
That's wonderful. Thank you. We have another question. In your mind, as you wrote This Is My America, how did you think of Tracy's relationships being different with Quincy versus Dean? The triangle.
Yeah.
You talk about the
Love triangle. Yeah, I'll talk about the love triangle without any spoilers. On that, so I wanted to have a love element in the story because I didn't want to write a story that just was dealing with what we call Black pain issues. I wanted to have a very strong Black female character because Black women have been leaders of movements, even looking at the Black Lives Matter movement. I wanted to honor them and the women that I know, but I also didn't want to continue to add to the stereotype that Black women are strong and you go to them for everything and they'll fix everything for you. They are the saviors for the things that are wrong in the world. Let's rely on them, and they have nothing else associated with them. It was really important for me to be able to have love and choice of love, because it's often taboo in this country to think about interracial relationships when it's dealing with a Black woman and anything else but a if they're in a heterosexual relationship, a Black man. It's sort of like this taboo thing that people don't often support or see, although when you look at the opposite, often that you see sort of this sort of opposite acceptance of Black men being able to be with anyone of any sort of race or identity. And so I wanted sort of these two love interests for Tracy to be addressing different kinds of things, and she could think about options. And so Dean, who is the white character in her life, who's a very good friend of hers, who loves her dearly, is a confidant for her. But he also is someone who needs to work on addressing bias in his understanding, whether it's with himself or with his family. And sort of he was there as an example to readers who are not Black, to think about what is it like to actually be anti-racist, and for you to sort of carry and learn that on your own without having to have someone else teach them that stuff. And so Dean had to do a lot of work on his own when an issue sort of came up, and he sort of caught himself either being ignorant to particular issues, maybe not understanding what Tracy was going through, or maybe some things that he sort of made. And so it was important to me to represent that, of like you are part, like be a part of the world, like it's not just someone else's problem, it's your issue to deal with too. And then Quincy, it was really important to me to create a character that people could work to understand, because in a lot of ways he was someone who his life changed at the killing of his father. So in the story, this happens early on, it's not a big spoiler, the killing of his father and the trajectory of his life. And he has a sort of like hard shell, kind of cool guy, hip kind of, thing going on with him. But he loves deeply, and he's got all these other elements that he's such a wonderful complement and also confidant to Tracy, is that I wanted people to sort of see behind just maybe what might have been the physical presence and the ways in which Quincy was like in the story. And so I really wanted that dynamic of her choosing it. And it's funny because like talking to a lot of high school students and middle school, like they loved those relationships so much. Like that's like what they talk about, like
Mhm.
they usually when I go in, they've all read it, so we can talk about like who they like the best and why. And and it's hard because my answer is always like, man, she's 18, like in 5 years she's probably not thinking about either of them, but then they're like, no, they're destiny forever, so that's the like the fun piece.
That's great. Um, so I want to talk a little bit about the mystery. I love mysteries. As a person who watches an episode of Murder, She Wrote every night, I love mysteries, and I love the mystery element in your book, and wondered if you could talk a little bit more about kind of how you arrived at the mystery and the process of writing that component of the book.
I'm a friend of Angela Lansbury too. I know Murder She Wrote.
Yeah. Go
My
JB.
my first books that I read as a young person were mystery. Encyclopedia Brown, Nancy Drew, any book that had either a ghost in it or some mystery element. I was obsessed with unsolved mysteries as like watching it at like 8 years old, convinced that I knew who like the murderer of someone in a certain situation, and I knew I saw him down the street. Like I was just that kind of person, and so I've always loved mystery. And as an adult, I reflect on why I love mystery elements and criminal law stories so much. I find it's really because I actually didn't there weren't characters that looked like me in books. And so I wanted to connect with a story, and a mystery or a thriller was a really great way for me to connect to it because it didn't matter who was the main character, because I felt like I was in discovery too of the story. And so that's why I love thrillers. I think I'll always have some kind of mystery element to my story. Um, as a plot point. I think also for young adult, it helps keep it be a page turner so that it's like really quick and fast and exciting, and you can talk about very heavy themes, but you're able to sort of move through the story because you do want to see, what happens sort of at the end. And so I really try to weave those plots of mystery throughout um, storytelling.
So, what would you want people to take away from this book? So, okay, we've read it all. We read it quickly, turned all the pages. When we put it down and until we read it a second or third time, because it's just one of those books that you can read over and over again and pull different things out that maybe you missed the first or second time that you read it. What would be your one hope um, that people would take away from this book?
Yeah, I mean, I think I the main thing that I wanted was for it to be a call to action. So that's why it was so important for me to have an author's note at the end, because I wanted readers to be hungry for more and be left with an emotional weight, some satisfaction, but still some sense of wanting to be a part of making change, and it would want to draw them into something. And so I provide resources about either innocence work or books that I used when I was reading and writing my book back in 2015 and 2016. And so call to action is a big thing. The other is to read again. I do have so many characters, and I really do want readers to see themselves in the different characters and try to think maybe a little bit more about those impacts, because there's so many different sort of um, focuses that you could have, whether that's looking at Tasha, Tracy's best friend, and her relationship, how their relationship changed, didn't change, her relationship with her father versus Tracy's relationship with her father, really looking at all those different dynamics, looking at the Evans family from the parents to Dean, thinking about their own families. Those are elements that I really, hope readers, go back to and kind of study, I guess, is what I'm trying to say.
That's wonderful, because there are so many pieces, and I'm excited because there are so many places that you can go with characters, right? And so to circle back to the character component a little bit, is they were really kind of complex and really thought through and thought out. So what, um, can you talk about your approach to writing the various characters or your approach to writing characters in general? And as I'm watching this, asking this question, there's another one coming up that said, were you inspired by anyone fictional or not for your character? So let's tie those two questions together. So, your approach, and then were there, any inspiration for any of the characters?
Mhm. My characters really live in my head. Um, their conversations with each other, their dialogue, all of those elements. I like to really vividly see my characters. And I think that's sort of the beauty of the storytelling, because I like people to root for, or, whether it's a villain or not, some interesting things. And so for me, it was really important that characters shouldn't be flat. They should have some rich textures to them, whether it's a personality, or whether they're there at a particular moment, or whether they're crafted in a way that a reader can really feel like they see themselves in that person's life, or they know people like that life. Because I've worked so because it's my third book. I really try not to write characters of people that I know, especially because I'm writing for young people, because I would never want a student to ever think that something that they either shared with me in confidence, or their experience, would then end up being part of my story. I feel like I've lived long enough in my 40, one, almost 2 years of life, that I've met enough people and personalities that when I think about a character, they kind of start to create and act on their own. I think the only character that probably was reminding me of someone who was there was actually the Dr. Scott, the community director. that was for you, because you've been such a huge support of just telling me just write, 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 write. You should really focus on that. And so I and this isn't sucking up or anything like that, but no, it's really true, to be able to want to have that representation of people who've been mentors, of people who've been really supportive in someone's life. And it felt like I needed to have that sort of community pinnacle person, even if the story was so big and it had all these other elements and there wasn't really a lot of time to sort of spend with that. And other books that I've written now, I usually don't have people, I don't have people that are in my life or that I've like worked with as part of my story. There are people outside in the world of media that sort of like hit me. So Richard Spencer character, I really sort of visualized, at the time, the white nationalist who had been sort of taking the media, and people call this, oh, this dapper gentleman. It really sort of like imprinted on my mind that people need to pay attention to language and how you're viewing people. And so I sort of started to think about that. But things going on in the world are high influences, conversations, they're high influences in my story. But I usually try to craft characters that are, unique, but common enough that people can be like, oh yeah, I know a guy like that. So
Yes, definitely. And Rosa said, apparently she didn't inspire the Rosa in your book. So now you're gonna have to correct it. She was like, but that's cool though. But she
I
said
know.
deuces. She was
Well,
like
I know.
deuces.
Yeah, I have more books to tell, Rosa. I'll tell more. Don't worry. I got
That,
you.
that is awesome. So you're coming, Rosa. So we have about 10 minutes left, and there are a couple of things maybe to pivot so that we can engage other folks. I know that there are some people who hadn't read, and we could have maybe an opportunity to go into a spoiler session. But I did want to at least tie up the kind of formal Q&A with, ooh, Veronica just gave us a question. I have another one. So let me look at Veronica's question. So many U of O faculty and students are coming into a new understanding of their relationship to race and American history as they read this harrowing and gorgeous book. Many campus units are reading your book together in the workplace. What do you hope for your colleagues would carry with them in their daily work as a result of reading your book?
Yeah, I mean, I think the um, empathy and understanding. I really try to tell in this story what is it like actually being a Black person in America and navigating. There's a particular scene that I really focused on writing about how she felt walking down the street and feeling like everyone was staring at her, and it was very specific to how she was treated in her particular community because of who her father was and the case being so public, but hoping that readers could sort of see what is it actually like being that person in that life. I hope, especially at U of O, because we are a predominantly white institution, um, that people look at the story of Tracy and empathize with her experiences, but think of themselves, are you Dean? Are you Mrs. Evans? Are you Mr. Evans in this story? Who are you in this story? Who are your family in this story? Who are your colleagues in this story? Um, when I was doing my talk, I was talking about how, for me being a sliver, like not my full whole self, who I am in the workplace, because so much of how people view me as a person or as a leader, um, if I'm not combating a particular bias or assumption about my, and it's genderized too. I mean, that's a big issue about how women are treated in leadership roles versus even Black women. This sort of expectation, because you're equity minded, that if you don't fix a system that I never built. So I was talking about Barack Obama the other day about how he didn't actually create the problem. How could he be one person to actually fix a system? I think there's a very, very high bar and high expectation that people of color, and I would say especially Black women, are expected to do the labor and the work, and they often don't make people happy. So, I found that I can have really good relationships with people over time, but the moment that I might not solve something for them, or I'm not able to, navigate in a way because I am, close with my colleagues and I really tried hard, it can sever that relationship in a way that if I was someone else, that expectation would never be on me. They would understand all of the other work that they're not even seeing happen and the barriers. And I think that's really important to think about, as people are reading the book, that it's not just about navigating those things. I think of, in my talk, I even talked about policing as an individual, telling someone else what to do, or that they're not doing something right, or they're in the wrong place, or that sort of like seeing someone. I think there's a lot of that stuff that actually happens in our campus community to our students, that they're in certain spaces and they, because they either are presenting themselves in a way that makes you feel comfortable with what you're used to or acceptable, or you immediately sort of have your eye on them, but you're not actually having your eye on maybe someone else who is doing the same exact thing, that it draws you to either say something or bring someone into their situation. That stuff happens more than you'd want to. I witnessed it happening with a colleague in my own office, looking at the window and seeing a community police officer following a staff employee who was Black, taking pictures of ducks that were baby ducklings. And all of us want to take pictures of baby ducklings, but
Right.
he had to have a particular kind of, encounter. And I think that it's those kinds of things of like, they are actually our daily things that people are dealing with that aren't just about police brutality. Like, I think that that's important and we should be looking at that larger piece, but there's the everyday work that happens that make the experience to be really difficult. And the last thing I'll say on this is a lot of people have expected the work around anti-racist work to be happening in their workplace, and it needs to fit within their window and their 8 to 5. And I'll say this, The reality is a lot of people of color on this campus, Black staff and faculty on this campus, we live this life outside of 8 to 5. My life of what I'm involved in, I rarely have a night that I'm not doing some kind of work, going to some kind of activity, engaging in some kind of aspect. It doesn't turn off for me. And I think a lot of people in the workplace expect for it to turn off in this window, or expect other people of color to do the work for them, even as their leader, when it's like, you actually can do this work. Like, I've read all these books. I mean, this is like my tiny bookshelf. I've read so many books on these issues. Have you done that? Have you tried to do your own conversation group? There's so much information out there that you actually can learn. Do you consume uh, media and outside of your own culture? Do you actively do that? Because if you do, you actually can learn so much. Because me, you, Doneka, other Black people and people of color, we actually have learned how to operate and live and navigate in a world that actually doesn't reflect us. And we've had to do that, and we're fine. I mean, we're not fine, right? But we're, we've had to do that, and I think other people can do that too, even if it makes them feel uncomfortable. Because actually, every day when I'm going into work, I'm at home now, I feel safe. I will feel uncomfortable at some point in my day. And that's directly related to who I am and my identity. And that's not the same story for a lot of people.
Awesome, great. And I saved the best question for last because it's a question about my babies. So the question is, how have your kids responded to all of this? And do they look up to their mom now as the published author?
They do. My son, well, he's too cool for school. He's like, oh no, mom. Yeah, that's cool, mom. He's 13. He's in the 8th grade. But he's quiet. He doesn't say a lot. But he's proud. He is proud of me. He's also benefited because I know so many authors now that I get their books, and he gets to get their books, and he feels like, oh, that's mommy's friend,
Nice.
Oh, Jason Reynolds, he's my favorite author, and he's mommy's friend. He's actually not my friend. I don't really know him. My sister does, but he doesn't know that. And my
Right.
daughter, who just turned 7, it's amazing the impact that having these books in her life, for her to be able to see them when they arrive. She was just so obsessed. And I'll just do this since we're in our last few minutes. So this is my book, but the fact that she can see these book covers now that were never there growing up when we were kids. She is mesmerized, but she's picking these books up. She's reading them, even though I pull them away because she's too young to be reading this stuff. But she loves to read. She reads at such a high level. And she's so proud of me. And she makes these not YouTube videos, but she makes these recordings on the iPad, and she'll be doing her own interviews, and
Nice.
and she'll create like book titles of books that she says that she's writing and reading. And that's really an amazing thing, and so powerful for someone of her age, especially in this community where she's often felt like she's an outsider because of what she looks like. So
Yes, that is awesome. Well, thank you for that and for sharing that. And we have 2 minutes left. I have not changed. We start on time and we end on time. And so for the last 2 minutes, now we're down to a minute. If you'd like to close us out, that would be great.
I want to say thank you. I shared a little bit of my talk, but for those that weren't there, I was so nervous for people to read my book. I didn't want people reading my book. I didn't, because it felt so personal. It was okay if other people read my book, because if they didn't like it, I don't have to meet them. Like, I don't have to see them. But it's a very different thing when a large community reads your work and your book, because books are actually, they're so personal, and people are very opinionated about what they like and they don't like. And so I think every single person who has sent me an email, that has meant so much to me in this time. I loved it. I've so appreciated my colleagues taking the time to do it, who are outside of my area, just reaching out. That's been really amazing. So I want to say thank you. I want to say thank you to Doneka for just supporting me and this work, for Julie and Amy from the Common Reading Committee, for really, pushing me and coming back to me because I said no the first time. Don't consider me. And they came back. And I'm so glad that you all came back and said, hey, are you sure you don't want to be considered? Because I'm so glad that I did.
Me too. This was fantastic. And I look forward to the books that are coming. And I know that there will be a lot of them, and I will be first in line to get my copy, and first in line to get my copy signed once we can do that. First in line to sell it for $1 million on eBay. I enjoy you, sis, and this has been amazing for you. I couldn't be prouder of this book and your love and care of us to actually put it out there so we could read it. And so thank you everyone for coming to our book club Q&A. And with that, I think we are done for the night, but only for the night. Thank you again, Kimberly. This has been wonderful.
Thank you.